What a surprising and deeply appreciated honor it is to receive this award, named for one of America's most eminent proponents of the public realm in planning and architecture. It is even more daunting to receive it the year after Vincent Scully, my one-time professor. He shunted me off whatever straight but narrow track I was headed down in law school onto a switchback career as an architecture and urban design groupie. Thank you, Notre Dame, Dean Lakutis, Henry Hope Reed, and Richard Driehaus. And thank you, Professor Scully, I think. I suppose it was only a matter of time before this award went to someone affiliated with federal government buildings. It is the government, after all, that has most notably and consistently embraced classical architecture since the nation's founding. And whether through public buildings, military forts, the Northwest Ordinance, the national parks, or the interstate highway system, the government has influenced the public realm on a scale that nothing else can approach. I grew up in Washington, D.C., as Adele noted, fully marinated in political events in the architecture of the government. For anyone who loves politics and who wants to deal with cities and architecture at large scale, I have the best job in the world. I've had it twice, in fact, as Adele noted. I'm a full public service recidivist. Governments cannot avoid architecture, no matter how hard they try. My mentor, the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, once said, quote, "Government can have as little involvement with the arts generally as it chooses, save that it cannot avoid architecture." And he added, "Architecture is inescapably a political art, and it reports faithfully for ages to come what the political values of a particular era were." Thomas Jefferson had thought much the same. He said, "Architecture is among the most important arts, and it is desirable to introduce taste into an art which shows so much." Accordingly, he thought Americans should avail themselves of every occasion when public buildings are to be created or presenting them as models for their study and imitation. Jefferson is often given credit for setting our American experiment in democracy off in the direction of classical architecture. He suggested to Virginia that its state capital be based upon the Roman temple. Writing about the design competition of the U.S. Capitol building in 1791, he urged, quote, "adoption of some one of the models of antiquity." Too much has been made of the supposed ideological reasons behind the choice of classical architecture for the nation's first public buildings. As former Henry Hope Reed Award winner Roger Kennedy noted in his book on the Greek Revival, Washington and Jefferson were aware of the political shortcomings of Greece and Rome. And though Jefferson may have leaned on antiquity, he was thoroughly inventive in the way he borrowed from the past. Look at his University of Virginia with each of its 10 pavilions in a somewhat different style. In creating that academic village with its central lawn, Jefferson warped the Roman Forum into an American pastoral. The Founding Fathers were not looking backward. One of the mottos placed on the Great Seal of the nation was Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. And the commissioners for the new capital city, advertising for building designs for the Capitol and President's House, said that those, quote, "public buildings in size, form, and elegance should look beyond the present day," unquote. What a great declaration of confidence in the future. There was no city of Washington on that particular day they wrote that, and yet I just love that. The public buildings should look beyond the present day. Federal buildings are not about style. We've had a plethora of federal building styles. Certainly our first federal buildings in Washington were neoclassical, and so were permanent federal buildings in the states when we started building those in the 1830s. After the Civil War, we built in eclectic styles, neo-Gothic, Richardsonian, French chateau. And then back to the classical in 1901 with an official declaration from the supervising architect of the Treasury. No doubt under the influence of this city's Columbian Exposition, he announced it had been officially decided, quote, "to adopt the classic style of architecture," unquote. Just a personal aside, he said that right after the government completed the old post office building, a neo-Romanesque building on Pennsylvania Avenue. It would be its proposed demolition in the 1970s that would lead to the creation of Don't Tear It Down, which I was fortunate then shortly thereafter to become the president of. and which we've just announced the other day, we are putting out an RFP for its redevelopment in a public-private project that will save it. Please look on the website. We need offerors. It sounds kind of un-American to have an official style. We're just not that ideological a people. We saw official styles in the 1930s, and it grates. One of Stalin's purges was architectural. He imposed an arid classical style in place of the avant-garde architecture of the constructivists. In 1940, a German publication referred to the party buildings in Nuremberg by Professor Speer, quote, as symbolic monuments dedicated to ideals of unity and a disciplined social order, unquote. The value of great American public buildings is not in their style per se, it is in their ambition. To paraphrase Jefferson in the Capitol Commissioners of 1791, public buildings should elevate the building arts. They should be elegant and express confidence in the future. It is not about style. To paraphrase Senator Moynihan, public buildings say something about our politics. Politics in the best sense. Politics as expressing our shared values. On the one hand, the very presence of standout public buildings in a community has a political significance. I'll post this talk on the web, and you'll be able to see a photo of Cheyenne, Wyoming's new federal building of 1906. Set on dirt streets, a stone Beaux-Arts U.S. post office and courthouse literally put the town on the map, expressed the nation's confidence in the town's future, and cemented the state's relatively new membership in the Union. Today, we might find just a tad over the top the 1916 declaration of the Chairman of the House of Representatives, Public Buildings and Grounds Committee. Quote, no youth or citizen ever looked upon a federal building in which the business of his country was being conducted, but that he became a better American. We might find more familiar the defense of a Texas representative, also in 1916, for the construction in his hometown of a post office, which he admitted was some 10 times as expensive as need be. Quote, this is mighty bad business for Uncle Sam, and I'll admit it, but the other fellows in Congress have been doing it for a long time, and I can't make them quit. Now, he said, we Democrats are in charge of the House, and I'll tell you right now, every time one of these Yankees gets a ham, I'm going to get a hog. Public buildings and public places show what kind of a people we are, the values as a people that we share and uphold, whether we are confident or timid about our prospects. Public buildings and public places are where we bond, where we come together as a people, literally, whether to celebrate or to protest. Tiananmen, Beijing, 1989. Tahrir Square, Cairo, 2011. The steps of the Lincoln Memorial, 1963. The places are metaphors for values. While I appreciate the architectural quality of our Chicago Federal Center by Mies van der Rohe, I am never prouder of that center than when it becomes the site of the annual Oktoberfest celebration. I am grateful, too, for the opportunity I had early in my career to help write the legislation that reclaimed Washington Union Station by Daniel Burnham as a train station and retail hub. Whenever I go there, I stop and watch the daily celebration that is a parade of travelers, shoppers, and workers ennobled by their surroundings, even if they are too intent on their grande mocha frappuccino to notice. Courthouses are the temples of our democracy. Within them, the power of government is deployed to mediate fairly and justly the rights of individual citizens, even against that very government. There is no higher embodiment of what our civil society is about. Those buildings deserve a quality and bearing worthy of that role. When I came to the General Services Administration as Commissioner of Public Buildings the first time in late 1995, GSA had earned, over the 45 years of its existence, a richly deserved reputation for truly mediocre buildings. The record was so abysmal that in that relatively short time, GSA erased from the national memory the very idea that public buildings could imbue a sense of pride and common purpose. Through our Design Excellence program, initiated by a great civil service architect, Ed Feiner, we began again building buildings worthy of the American people. We initiated a Good Neighbor program so that more federal building plazas would be both grand and inviting community places. We embarked on a First Impressions program so that citizens visiting federal buildings would find well-designed, welcoming entrances and lobbies, and so federal employees' entries to their workplaces would be uplifting and professional. Through their location, siting, and quality, federal buildings should contribute to improving the communities in which they are built. In October of 2009, President Obama issued an executive order aimed at greening the federal government's operations, and he put federal location policy on a higher plane. Appropriate to the urban and smart growth renaissance of our times, he directed that federal facilities like GSAs be located wherever possible at transit-oriented developments. We are enthusiastically carrying out that policy when we decide where to lease as well as where to build. Much of our effort to invigorate federal buildings, to make them inviting public places, to make them dynamic street presences, will be undermined if we allow the dictates of security to outstrip common sense. We have to balance legitimate security concerns for our buildings and their occupants against our cherished value of open government. We must never allow fearfulness to dominate design. Perhaps our most important present-day design imperative has everything to gain from studying the lessons of traditional architecture. Our pre-World War II buildings were all, to use our current parlance, green. Built in the era before air conditioning and mechanical air handling, before we sealed our windows, before electric lighting could be brought to every nook and cranny, those buildings have much to teach us about building in harmony with nature. Orienting a building to manage solar gain on its different facades, maximizing daylight, minimizing the energy needed for ventilation, heat, and cooling. These are all aspects of design that architects used to know and then forgot. We in GSA are committed to being a green proving ground for the building industry, to aiming for zero environmental footprint. We know that traditional architecture, whether in our own inventory of some 500 historic buildings or elsewhere, can help show us the way, no matter the style of building we are greening. In the end, why do I think public buildings matter? My father, the son of immigrants, grew up on the Lower East Side in New York City with his 5 brothers and sisters. In their tenement apartment, there were not enough beds to go around, so they took turns sleeping on kitchen chairs pushed together. Once in a while, my father would go uptown and study in the public reading room of the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue, a building and a room worthy of a potentate. Only in America, you do not have to be a king to belong in that space. In America, in a public building, that space belongs to you. In that space, my father did not become just a better American. It is in that space that he truly became an American. Thank you.